And also, Danny Lopez is an individual that graduated with a bachelor's degree in the University of Puerto Rico and has a master's degree in biblical studies from Dallas Theological Seminary. I know you've served as well in the West Dallas community as an advocate. I've been on the board of West Dallas Community School, of course, and also been involved in the West Dallas Neighborhood Transition Manager, and it is delightful to have you in studio with us as well.
Well, thanks for having us.
You know, when we talk about West Dallas, or recently we talked about the Bachman Lake issue, or we've talked about Bonton, wherever we talk about some of the real significant needs. And so for some of our listeners, they may know that there are some places in the community where it may not be as safe as where they live, but help us understand exactly kind of the genesis of some of this, because this is something that we need to really begin to get involved with, even encourage churches to get involved. But talk about the particular need that we're talking about here.
Absolutely. I can completely identify with you in my upbringing. I grew up in Puerto Rico, mostly in the countryside. But I do remember as a child just going outside and never coming back until dinner and just having a lot of fun and never really concerning ourselves with any danger outside of just normal, crazy things that children might do, playing with animals outside or something like that, but nothing really related to crime. And, even right now at this stage in my life, our family lives in a neighborhood that is relatively safe. We don't have to concern ourselves necessarily with letting our children play outside with their neighbors, thinking that something might happen to them that's related to the activity with the people who are moving around, but that is not necessarily the case. And so our organization has had an opportunity to serve. We will be celebrating 10 years, by the way, this coming November. We're very excited about that. We've mostly been serving in the area of West Dallas. These last 2.5 years, we also have a field team that has been working in South Dallas. And now we're looking into expanding into other areas of the city as well. But you're absolutely right. I mean, sometimes there are neighborhoods in the community where people do not have that freedom. And our organization sees that as an injustice, because let's picture this. Let's think of a hardworking individual, maybe a plumber, a construction worker, who really is trying to do the same thing that we are all trying to do, which is to provide for our families, provide for a safe place for them to be, provide food, and all of the things that we believe are necessary for their livelihood. And, you work all day long outside. You're extremely tired by the end of the day. And outside of your house, there might be a lot of people who are under the influence of drugs.
Right.
So you're thinking that your children come out of school at 3, 4 p.m., they're released, come home, and they can go outside and at least relax themselves a little bit. Well, under those circumstances, you're probably not going to feel free in letting them go outside. And that is exactly what we have observed in these communities. And so our organization works precisely to help them.
And I might just mention about 10 miles from here, I was visiting someone, and this goes back many years ago, who just as we were talking said, see that corner there? That's where I saw somebody shot and killed.
Yes.
Now, that's not that far from the studio. It's further south from here, but it just illustrates again that here, growing up saying, I saw someone killed in front of me just down the street from where I live, I think illustrates the point, doesn't it, Elizabeth?
It does. The violence that comes with the crime in our communities it's a really hard but very real thing for the families that are there. I think in particular about one mother that we work with who has 5 children. Again, a mother who just more than anything wants to be a faithful mom, and she loves the Lord and she loves her children. And in the same way that my children and I practice tornado drills in our home, she practices gunfire drills.
Yes.
Because this is a very real occurrence and it's happening down the street from her all the time. And so her and her children practice. If you hear gunfire in the middle of the night, you get under the bed. And this is what you do.
And I've lived in urban areas where we've been robbed. My wife has been mugged. So, I understand that. But again, if you live in a safe suburban community, you don't think about this. So I'm really hoping today we might help people understand what that is like. And just imagine in your mind's eye what it's like to have a gunfire drill. So these are the kind of people that you want to help. But in some respects, what you're trying to do, Elizabeth, as I understand it, is to really empower them to transform their community. Can you explain that?
Sure. It really is the basis of our model. At the end of the day, I can want and desire a safe neighborhood for residents in West Dallas or South Dallas all day long.
Yes.
But I don't have legal authority to make it happen. I don't live in West Dallas. I don't live in South Dallas. There are a ton of men and women in this community that want for their community, for their families, for their neighbors, they want a safe community. And what they are lacking is access to resources, particularly the legal system, to get that done. And so at the end of the day, our model completely relies on their bravery, on their willingness to stand up for their family, on their willingness to confront the drug dealers and the criminals in their community, and to hold the owners of properties where crime is happening accountable in a court of law.
And that is a key issue as well, because sometimes they actually sell drugs, sell weapons, whatever in that home, and there are no repercussions for that. Again, I don't want this to sound negative, because just a week ago we had a police officer here from Dallas.
I heard that.
Yeah, and again, just to recognize that they have a tough job, but the bottom line is they're not there 24/7, but people are there, aren't they?
Absolutely, and the residents are really the ones who do most of the work. We are here to support them, really. And so maybe if I can explain the kind of organization that we are in short words, basically we're a nonprofit law firm that specializes in nuisance abatement. So basically we are supporting residents in the community, giving them the legal resources that they need to confront the crime-ridden property owners. And we use the civil justice system to do that.
Again, we're going to take a break and come back and talk a bit more about that. Let me first of all give you some action items, and we're going to give you a whole lot more before the hour is up. We first of all have a link to actforjustice.org. If you're driving right now, you don't have to remember that. Just simply click on the Point of View website and it will take you there. There is a video that's about 2 minutes long, and I want to encourage you to take the time when you have a moment to watch the video. It's only going to take 2 minutes out of your life. And then in the upper right-hand corner, there's an arrow, and that's a share button. So you could then put that on your Facebook page. You could put it on your Twitter feed. You could send it to someone. And I want to talk about how maybe we can mobilize some people even this hour to get involved with Act for Justice. So we'll take a break and continue our conversation right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Here's a question for you. What country is leading the world in reducing CO2 emissions? Germany? France? Japan? No, the country reducing greenhouse gas emissions more than any other country is the United States of America. Your ability or inability to provide the right answer to that question probably says a great deal about the news sources you consume. Much of the mainstream media made a big deal out of the fact that the U.S. withdrew from the Paris Accords. And they continuously reminded us that the U.S. never signed the Kyoto Protocol. What they rarely, if ever, told us is the U.S. has reduced CO2 emissions. Here's another question for you. What country leads the world in total CO2 emissions? If you guessed the United States, once again, you would be wrong. China is the world's largest emitter of carbon dioxide, and India is the third largest emitter. I bring this up because it shows the problem of trying to curb the United States when we don't have the ability to curb other nations. For every ton of reduced CO2 emissions in the U.S., China and India produce nearly 10 more tons. In other words, they cancel out any reduction by the United States by 10 times. The solution being proposed in the Green New Deal would be to force the United States to reduce CO2 emissions to the point that the country might be carbon neutral. That is not possible. But even if it was possible, the climate sensitivity models predict that it would only affect the world temperature by 1/10 of a degree Celsius by 2100. And even if all the countries adopted a similar policy, it would only cool the Earth by about 0.2 of a degree Celsius by the end of the century. I believe some of these important political and scientific facts deserve to be publicized while we're currently debating domestic environmental policies. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From roadside attractions, Run the Race. Two brothers share an unbreakable bond, but life's unexpected adversities put their future in question. Run the Race, rated PG, in theaters February 22nd.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Talking about the organization Act for Justice. By the way, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. I think this is probably a program where you just want to sit back and listen. But again, we're talking with Elizabeth and Danny. And Danny, let me come back to you for just a minute, because I think people need to understand the context of your ministry. Can you help us understand a little bit more about what's going on in these communities?
Well, in my experience, I've been with ACT for 4 years, working in the community, and really, when I began working, I didn't know what to encounter. I did not grow up in a community like that, so there was a big curve for me to learn exactly. And thankfully, the way we do our work is very community-based, very relational. So we have boots on the ground for ACT is what we call a community advocate. And I was a community advocate with ACT for 3 years, and that's basically getting to know people, establishing relationships with them, sitting down with them in their sofas and talking about life, praying with them, sharing with them the hope of the gospel, trying to connect them with pastors and leaders in the community that want to help them. But to be honest with you, there were, and I wasn't aware of this at the beginning, in my mind, I had narratives in my head of what I believed I was going to encounter there.
Oh, sure.
What type of person I was going to encounter there. And as very often happens, I happen to be very wrong about many of my assumptions. What I have learned throughout these 4 years is that these communities, for the majority of cases, are filled with amazing, hardworking, honest people. Many of them are brothers and sisters in Christ who are just really trying to provide for their families, and they are trying to live a correct life. Many of them are even empowered. They are already involved and engaged in any number of projects trying to make their community better. But what I have learned is that even as they try to do that, they can always, in certain cases, come up short because they just do not have the resources.
That's what I was going to say.
Sometimes the resources means they don't have the money, right? Or they don't know, they don't have a network. They don't have people who could help them solve a particular problem. So I can tell you a story of a very good friend of ours. We will name her Miss X for the purposes of this show. And this lady has been in the community for many decades, and she is a wonderful dear sister in Christ who's heavily involved in her church. She is she's probably in her late 70s at this point, and she got her undergraduate degree several years ago, and now she's a substitute teacher. So she's highly involved in the community, and she took it upon herself several years ago she had several properties around her that were creating a big nuisance for her. There were people who were very loud and fighting, and she would hear all of the things that you don't really want next to your house, and she felt unsafe. Well, this lady had enough energy and strength and courage in her to do something about it. She actually found out who the owners of the property were, and she took it upon herself to write letters to these owners.
Good for her. Yes.
And that's an amazing story, and we meet people like that all the time. Now, here's the thing. Do you think that the owner of that property paid as much attention to that letter that she sent the owner as if she would have sent it on, if a law firm had sent it on her behalf?
Yes. And again, we know the drill on that one, don't we?
Yes. And so she did everything she could, and she educated herself, she acted, but there was a limit there.
Yes. And
so that is where ACT can step in and bring a little more resources that she would not have access to otherwise. And that's where we bring value to the process.
Elizabeth, talk about that, because, again, your legal background, I think, is going to be key, because I have dealt with the same kinds of issues sometimes, and something just on a letterhead. Fortunately, I have a son-in-law that's a lawyer, so it makes it a little easier to do. But it does get an individual's attention, and you, again, bring some additional resources that are not available in those communities, don't you?
Sure. Our process really, it really harkens back to the conflict resolution that the Lord gives us in Matthew.
Right.
And so the first step of our process, it starts with the community, and it looks very much like what Danny spoke of before, where the community is reaching out to the owner of one of these drug houses and trying to seek resolution. Truth is, that isn't always effective, and owners don't respond. What we bring to the table as a second step in that process are lawyers. And so we do have lawyers in-house at ACT that work with our residents, but we are also able to leverage some of the very best and finest law firms here in Dallas. And it's just been an amazing blessing that lawyers in this community want to step up and they want to serve in the city. And so we've been able to leverage those resources to come in, represent these residents using a nuisance cause of action, and send that second letter to the owner and on law firm letterhead. And when you get that letter, you often will respond. You'll come to the table and you'll work towards a solution. Sometimes owners don't. And if they don't, we have these lawyers, the very best in Dallas, that are willing to go all the way to the courthouse for our clients if necessary.
You also probably have some expertise, because I think the average person would say, I wouldn't even know where to go to find a person that knows anything about code compliance, for example. I'll just pick that out of the top of my head. But again, you bring those resources too, don't you?
We do. So we've built over 10 years that expertise, not only in nuisance law, but also in resources that come around that. So working with code, working with police, working with a lot of other city departments that care very much about these communities and want to work with the residents that live there. And so we are able to connect residents to city officials in addition to connecting them to the law and to the courts in order to seek resolution on these properties.
Now, here's a couple of action items. I'm just full of action items, you know. Okay. And when I was at Dallas Seminary, they always called me the so what professor, because I always say, okay, we have this, but so what? I can think of one right off the top of my head. Some of our listeners right now are in communities or know people in communities that have a need for your service and did not even know you existed. So that's point number one. Point number two, there's some listeners here that either have a friend who's a lawyer, are a lawyer, or have a connection with a law firm, and maybe they don't even know about these organizations that exist and the things that you're doing right now. And then, of course, I want to talk for just a minute, Danny, if I could, about churches, because, you know, there are a lot of churches, and I'm seeing more and more churches working to say we want a partnership. We recognize that we are privileged to be in an affluent area. We aren't dealing with these kinds of issues, but we want to partner with a church in South Dallas, West Dallas, whatever, to begin to help you with our resources so that you can sensitize us to the need, and we can, with the individuals in the body of Christ, help you as well. So talk about some ways in which people can connect up.
Absolutely. And I would say that we have already been blessed tremendously with great partnerships with many churches across the city. We've had a great response from many brothers and sisters who see the need, who understand it, and they want to get involved, and we count that as a tremendous blessing. From that perspective, we see ourselves as bridge builders, right? Because as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, a lot of the people who live in these communities are brothers and sisters.
That's right.
And I think that for a Christian, that should give you a different perspective, right? I mean, regardless of what narrative you might have in your mind of how you paint people who live across town in the part where you never want to go, the fact is that there are brothers and sisters in Christ, people who believe in Jesus, who will be there throughout all eternity worshiping the Father, who need help. And I think a lot of people have already started to see that, and we've been blessed tremendously with those partnerships. But usually what that looks like in one of our communities, we have several opportunities during the year for service. We've done crime restriction services, which may look like people from a church come to a community and they will help clean an alleyway.
Right.
Because many times those alleyways have thick brushes and you can't see all the way through the alleyway. And really, a lot of people congregate there to do a lot of things that they shouldn't be doing. And that's right behind your house. And so we've had people from churches come in on a Saturday and just clean the whole alleyway.
Right.
And that creates a huge difference. We've also had, we're an organization that believes tremendously in the power of prayer.
Yes.
So we bring a lot of people to conduct prayer walks, and we will have them knock on doors, give people important safety information that they need to keep the community safe, but at the same time offer to pray for them and to present them and their families and in prayer. And we also partner with local churches in the communities we serve. We have good, strong relationships with pastors in the community. And so if we come across somebody in the community that needs prayer and they're interested in visiting a church, we will connect them with a church. So there are two types of potential church partnerships. They're internal in the communities we serve, or external, people who live outside. But there are plenty of opportunities for people to serve. They just need to look at our website and see what we're working on, and we can make something work.
Website, Act for Justice. .org. And again, you don't have to remember it. We've got the link right there. I already gave you an assignment. It's 2 minutes and 10 seconds. So it's just only 2 minutes out of your life to watch the video and then click that share button and post it somewhere. And you might want to send it to a pastor because I was thinking even right now, matter of fact, I'm going to a missions event Sunday night, and again, we want to challenge people to send missions across the ocean. But we've got mission field right in our own backyard. Yes. And so I want to encourage you to pass this on to maybe a missions pastor at your church, to pass this on to maybe somebody in law enforcement in your church, pass it on to somebody who is in a law firm in your church and educate them about that. We have some other action items, but one more I would mention. We talked about prayer. I bet you have a prayer ministry at your church. Encourage them to be praying for Act for Justice. We'll take a break and continue our conversation right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, and we are talking with two individuals with Act for Justice. You can go to Act for Justice or just simply ACT. That's all you really need to know. We have a video there, and I might just very quickly, before I get to Elizabeth, because I want to talk about the process, maybe, Danny, have you talk about what's on the website, because there's a place there where you can see the solution. There's a place where you can get involved, and then you have all sorts of sort of drop-down opportunities for people to pray about this. There's some information about becoming an advocate, about Generation Justice. So give us just a moment to talk about what people will find when they land on the website and which button to begin to click on if they want to get involved.
Well, you know, at the very bottom of that website, if you see, there's a section where you can submit your email address. And if you do that, you can receive updates from our organizations, and those updates include opportunities to volunteer and service projects like the ones I mentioned earlier during the previous section. You can also just learn about our mission, our vision, and you can learn about open positions, joining our team. But as you did mention, we covet prayers.
Yes.
As you can imagine, you know, security is a main issue for us. We have field teams working in communities where things are happening that are, quite frankly, dangerous.
Yes.
And so that's just one reason why we need people to consistently cover us in prayer. We thankfully, we haven't had any kind of issues, and we want it to remain that way. And we believe that a big part of why that is because we have a lot of people praying. And so, but there are many other opportunities to pray for the organization, our organization too, by the way. When I say that we believe in prayer, it is a part of our culture. Every day of the week at 11 a.m., we stop what we're doing and we get together for half an hour.
Wonderful.
And we pray.
Wonderful.
We pray as a team. We pray for the different field teams and the different cases. So we try our very best to cover everything that we're doing in prayer. So we definitely covet those prayers, and there are plenty of opportunities to connect that way. And again, we have prayer walks throughout the year in the areas where we are serving, and those are great opportunities for Christians to minister to the community.
And again, going to the website, they can even give you a call. I think it's 214-951-9151.
That is correct.
And I would encourage anybody that's in a position of leadership, so that would be a pastor, a small group leader, Bible fellowship leader, you want to actually put this down as your contact on your phone, because I guarantee sooner or later you're going to have somebody tell you some story from a neighborhood community, and they say, what can I do? And you go, I remember this interview that I actually heard, and I can't remember the name of even the guy that did the interview, much less the people that interview, but I do remember that organization, and it's on my phone, and then you begin to go and take that and use that effectively. So take the time to connect up with them. There's a place, as we already mentioned, for you to subscribe to receive updates. The address, phone number, material there. The video, which I would encourage you to watch, is there. And so, Elizabeth, let me just come to you for just a minute, and let's talk about the process that you go through as a lawyer and as a member of the team to take individuals who have a problem down to final resolution. What does that look like?
Well, every case is different, which keeps us on our toes.
I'm sure.
And we enjoy. But in your typical case, the first step is identifying these properties. And so we are getting information from all sorts of sources. We're getting it from police. We're getting it from neighborhood leaders, from local pastors, where these drug houses are. So again, these houses where there is active drug selling, there's prostitution, there is a lot of violence happening. Once we know where one of these properties are, the community advocates that Danny mentioned earlier, our boots on the ground effort, they start getting to know the neighbors that live next to these drug houses. So across the street, next door, maybe living behind. And so these are families that every day they are seeing and living the consequences of that activity. They're seeing the drug traffic come. They are seeing the needles, the used needles in their yards. They are hearing the gunfire at night. These are the families that are doing those gunfire drills, right? And so we are spending a lot of time in their living room, on their front porch, getting to know them, as Danny mentioned, praying with them, hearing their story.
Yes.
At some point in that process, once we've gotten to hear their story and they've reached a point where they want to take action and they've decided, I want my street to be safe, we will educate them about their legal rights. And so again, telling them about nuisance nuisance cause of action, that the law says you do not have to live next to this, and there are options for you. If those residents are interested, our next step is to bring them together. So the families on the street that are experiencing the same thing, bringing them together, believing very much in strength in numbers, and educating them again together and asking collectively, neighbors, do you want to take a stand against the owner of this property? And if they say yes, and it is a Holy Spirit-driven yes, there's a lot of courage that comes into that yes, then we at ACT will represent them. So we become their attorneys, and then
Excellent.
we will also refer them over to one of our volunteer law firms, again, working with just the very best law firms in town, who will also engage them and take on their case. And then we just start a normal litigation process. So we start writing a demand letter from the community, again, to the owner of this property that says, hey, owner, we know this is a drug house. It's not acceptable in our community, and we want you to do something about it. And if they respond, then we enter into settlement negotiations and try to settle the case. If they don't, then we keep escalating up the chain, again, sending letters on law firm letterhead, and if necessary, filing petitions in court and going all the way to trial.
Wow. And again, this empowers people that could never have imagined this ability to do that, because as you mentioned just a few minutes ago, Danny, these are individuals that don't have a lot of resources. I think the average citizen listening right now say, can I get Elizabeth on my team? I mean, because there are all sorts of things we have in our community, but especially when you go into some of these areas where economically they're somewhat depressed, they don't have the opportunity to be empowered. And you have empowered them in ways that they couldn't even possibly have imagined until you showed up.
Absolutely. And, again, like Elizabeth mentioned, a lot of that comes through building the relationship. I think that when you demonstrate to people that you care about them, that you love them, that you wish the best for them, there's a trust that's built over time. And we are seeking not just to connect them to the legal resources, which is our ultimate goal, but we're also trying to help them in other areas as well. So as those relationships are happening and we learn of needs, we try to connect people to the resources, right? So there are many services that the city may offer that they may not be aware of. We make them aware of that, and that empowers them. There are other nonprofit organizations and churches that have a plethora of services that they are offering that could potentially help them tremendously, but they may not be aware of that. So the community advocate makes them aware, allows them to understand that these resources are there, available for them, and really we see a lot of people responding to that. And so the empowerment model comes through that relationship, the trust that's built there, but also educating people on all of the different resources that they have. And so leadership building is another area that we are working with as well. We've had residents in the community who demonstrate leadership skills and abilities, and they have the best of the community in mind. And we have helped those people set up their neighborhood associations, giving them 501c3 status to become nonprofit organizations. We have taken those people to conferences in other places in the nation where they're talking about community safety and community organizing and all of these things. So the model is very integrated. There's a strong spiritual component. We believe in the power of the gospel and in God's ability to transform individuals, families, and entire communities, and we make people aware of that. And we also support them in all of these other ways. And we have seen God do amazing things. People have become truly empowered in other areas as well. I can share stories about that as well if you want to.
We might too. I was just thinking for just a minute, for the person that is born in the United States, speaks English, but maybe grew up in an impoverished area, that's one hurdle. Let's add one more. We have a lot of individuals here that are refugees and immigrants that maybe don't speak the language. Now, you recognize my desire to get my books in other kind of languages, and a lot of our friends teach ESL. But again, if you've come from maybe a third world country, you're a refugee, the government was something you would fear. So the thought of even knowing that the government had resources that would help you is foreign to them. The idea of calling the police is something you would not do because they're on the take with the drug lords or whatever it might be. So in some respects, if you think it's difficult for somebody who was born in the United States and speaks English, just imagine how much more your community advocates have to begin to address those issues and help them begin to understand all the resources that really are available to them.
Absolutely. That is one of the things that community advocates spend a lot of time doing. When it comes to people who did not grow up here, you are absolutely right. they don't necessarily understand that there are systems in place. And even our very model of how we deal with these problem properties is conceptually, it's kind of difficult for them to understand, because even many countries that I've visited before, you have the laws in place and there is a system and there is a method to deal with this, but can you carry it on? That's another question altogether, because you may not have people who are actually willing to do it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it takes some time, but when they get it, they run with it, and they do very well in our experience.
Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover, and we'll certainly try to do that as quickly as we can before the end of the program today. And if you've just joined us, we're certainly encouraging you to go to actforjustice.org. And if you think some people might benefit from this, we have a way in which you could actually send a podcast or this YouTube video to them as well. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. When the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit declined to review a decision of that court that said that the cross-shaped Bladensburg World War I Veterans Memorial is unconstitutional, not all the judges agreed. Chief Judge Gregory noted his dissent. He said, quote, "Nearly a century ago, Maryland citizens, out of deep respect and gratitude, took on the daunting task of erecting a monument to mirror the measure of individual devotion and sacrifice these heroes had so nobly advanced. The panel majority says their effort violates the Constitution the soldiers fought to defend. I, respectfully, think otherwise." Judge Niemeyer said with some exasperation, quote, "Until this action was filed by persons who claimed to be offended by the presence of the monument, no complaint had been made about its presence," unquote. But Judge Wilkinson was poetic in his dissent. He wrote, quote, "The dead cannot speak for themselves, but may the living hear their silence. This memorial and this cross have stood for almost 1 full century. Life and change flow by the small park in the form of impatient cars and trucks. That is disturbance enough," unquote. He concluded simply noting that the park in which the memorial stands, quote, "may not be Arlington National Cemetery, but it is the next thing to it. I would let the cross remain and let those honored rest in peace," unquote. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, feel free, 1-800-351-1212. If you want to leave a note, of course, we broadcast also on Facebook Live, but most importantly, I want to point you to actforjustice.org. And Danny, let me come to you for just a minute. I know you have at least one more story, and I know you could fill an entire hour just with the stories.
Absolutely.
But
Yes.
I thought at least share one more in case somebody just is saying, okay, I don't know much about this organization. I tuned in late. Talk about what you do, but most importantly, I think as you tell the story, people will get a sense of what you actually are doing in these communities.
Yes, and during the previous section, what you heard Elizabeth was describe what the process looks like. What I would like to share is how that can potentially help in a community, right? So
Sure.
there are very direct and clean and easy to understand results from that. If a drug house, for example, if it's shut down, then no more drugs are going to be sold out of there. Then probably a good tenant will move in, and you won't have people who are under the influence of drugs and so on and so forth at that property. So that's a very clear and clean win and very obvious for everybody. They immediately start experiencing peace and tranquility. They can sleep better at night. They have a better quality of life in any way imaginable. But there's also other streets that are nearby to that property that are benefiting tremendously from what's happening there. There are many different potential benefits, but one story that comes to my mind of how this can really impact one family is the story of a young lady, again, a friend of ours. We will call her Miss Y.
Mm-hmm.
And this young lady was, I believe, about 11 or 12 years old when ACT met her family. And at 11 or 12, when she came back home every day from school, she was coming down her street to get home. And even at that age, people would stop her and proposition her because there's an assumption there. There are so many women who are walking up and down these streets. There's an assumption that if you're walking there, this happens. Could you imagine an 11-year-old girl who really has nothing to do with any of that being propositioned?
Mm-hmm.
That's a big difficulty, right? So fast forward several years, her family, we represented them in several cases. I want to say 2 or 3 years later, that street is now clean. No drug houses there.
Excellent.
You do not see prostitutes walking up and down that street. And that young lady is now feeling safer. And she's doing better in every possible way. We saw that young lady go from being scared and being in that difficult situation to doing well in school, graduating high school with honors, going to college, and now she is a young professional who is doing very well, and she is motivated to continue growing in many areas of her life. And so that is an effect, a good effect of the work that's being done. Just by shutting down these properties, you give people a chance to move, to breathe, and to develop themselves. And we count ourselves tremendously blessed to have been a part of that. You know, really, in the end, everybody has it in them, right? And if the Holy Spirit is working in a person's life, he can do amazing things. But again, sometimes there are external factors that are limiting your abilities. And we pray every day that God would allow us to step in and help in any way. Now, we do have a specific way to help, but there are other areas in which we are willing to help. And so with this young lady, for example, we helped with prayer through that process, you know, trying to connect them with churches and so on and so forth. But I just wanted to share that story because it's different to hear the theoretical model.
Yes.
And then when you actually know of people, human beings, who are being affected by the activity, and that's when you start kind of wrapping your head around the possibilities. And we've been blessed to see it.
And again, you can recognize that if you've ever been very anxious and you were a student and you were so anxious and you couldn't really study, or if there was a lot of disruption, and you can understand that that would affect you. I know of studies that I've seen, Elizabeth, that suggest that if indeed they hear gunshots all the time, you get some almost the same PTSD kind of experience that a young child would have in a war zone. Mm-hmm. Now, you eliminate that, then you allow that human flourishing to take place. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the end result of the kinds of things you're doing, right?
It is, and you're absolutely right. There's an amazing growing body of research speaking directly to that issue on community violence and its impact on childhood trauma and anxiety and depression and the impact that it really is having on children's ability to do well in school and to flourish in life. And what's amazing is the research is also showing that when you bring peace back to a community, it brings the child back into a place where they can do well in school and they aren't experiencing that anxiety. And what's even more amazing is the research is showing is that when you do that in the context of faith, the results are amplified. And so we are just really excited. We are excited to be a part of that solution.
Let's, if we can then, Dana, give us the marching orders here because we've got a few minutes left. But it seems to me that, first of all, we want to get people to pray. And again, if you go to actforjustice.org, hit that scroll down button so you can find subscribe to receive updates. I might recommend you put it at the top in case people are too lazy to scroll down.
That's a good idea.
Just because, again, you scroll down so you can find that. That also give you the name, address, and things like that. So that's one thing we want them to do. Number two, I want to encourage some of you that are churches, law firms, maybe even foundations that maybe are just finding out about this for the first time, to consider supporting that with your time, your talent, or your treasure. And most importantly, if you are aware of other places where this could minister, or you are aware of individuals that did not know there was such a thing as ACT, I want you to connect them up. So there's a couple things I've thought of. What have I missed?
Well, I do want to say one more thing before we leave is to let you know that, and all of your listeners know that we are actually in the process of expanding our area of service. We are now in South Dallas and in West Dallas, and this year we began working in South Oak Cliff as well, and we are looking next year, 2020, to begin a 10-year vision that includes other areas in the city of Dallas, like Bachman Lake area.
Yes, we've had some people on talking about that recently.
Yes, and so we're expanding. We're looking into other markets as well, other cities across the nation. So it's very exciting work, and we're very excited about the potential for the next 10 years. So you can learn all about that through our website, and we can keep you updated, again, if you share your email address with us in that subscribe button. I also, if you're interested in donating, that's an option too through the website. There's a big button in your top right corner that says donate.
Yes.
And so there are plenty of opportunities to do that as well. You can like our page on Facebook. We have Advocates for Community Transformation, and that's another way of learning everything that we are doing. And so that's it.
Well, not all, because, again, I would encourage people to get that video and send it on. But, again, this whole interview would be something you might want to pass on. So if you go to our website, pointofview.net, first of all, of course, you will see some of the links to the Facebook page and Twitter feeds and all of that. So that's right next to your pictures. But also, if you wanted to send this entire interview, there's a place where it says both watch and listen. So you could download the podcast, send it to a pastor and say, this was a really good interview. I think our church needs to get involved. Or send it to somebody in a law firm and say, is your law firm involved in this? And if not, they need to get involved. Or then in just about an hour or two, we'll have it up on YouTube and send them the YouTube link. And
Fantastic.
That's another way that you can sign up a few people.
That's great. We have several events during the year, too. So really, if you sign up through our website, you're going to receive emails letting you know that we have different events where you will be further educated on what we do and what we're planning on doing. And we would be glad to have you at any of those events. We really have a lot of fun with our friends who are interested in our work.
Well, and I'm going to be at a missions event this weekend, as I mentioned, and I do a lot of those, but is it possible that either or both of you could come and speak at a missions conference and talk about what's happening in the community?
Sure. Absolutely.
Well, I'm just trying to give you as many opportunities as possible.
No, I really appreciate it. I would personally be willing to do that. Absolutely. We love it.
Well, again, missions is overseas, but missions is also in our own backyard.
Absolutely.
And so Judea and Samaria, but how about, a couple of other places besides the uttermost parts of the earth? So again, Danny and Elizabeth, been fun to have you in studio. Let's do it again sometime. And thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Sounds great. Thanks for having us.
We'll be right back.
The leader looked around the table, motioning to the older men. He said, "You're here to remind us how faithful God has been in the past. Now, you middle-aged guys, you keep us focused on what God is doing right now. Make sure we don't stop. And you younger guys, keep us looking forward. Imagine what God wants us to be doing in the years to come." There's a lot of wisdom there. We have to be thankful for the past, focused on the present, and mindful to plan for a great future. Many listeners have made bold moves to partner with Point of View Radio and accomplish great things for more than 45 years. But as we look around, we do see many positive things, and I think we can all admit there's a lot more to be done. It's time to think about your next bold move, what you can do to invest for our nation's future. Be thinking about that. If you have an answer now, don't wait. Make your next bold move now. Give online at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. It's our future. The time is now. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. We have a lot to cover in the next couple of hours, and we're going to spend in just a few minutes looking at financial issues once again. That is a question that from time to time you ask, and we certainly want from time to time to answer those questions. And what is happening with the stock market? What is happening with the economy? For those of you with investments, or those of you with 401ks or IRAs or anything like that, you certainly want to know about that. So we're going to spend some time with our good friend Jerry Tuma in just a minute. Let me give you a program note, because in the next hour we're going to talk about marijuana, mental illness, and violence. Alex Berenson has been an individual that has written about this, a very good article that appeared with our friends at Hillsdale College in Imprimis, and we're going to get into that, and it's actually a commentary that I've done on that subject as well. So we will focus some time and attention. And let me also mention that today we're going to give you an action item. As I mentioned just the other day, Senator Ben Sasse introduced what is called the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, because we seem to have a lot of people that are convinced that maybe infanticide is not such a bad deal after all. So we want to encourage you to contact your senators about this. So we have an action item, which I'll talk about a little bit later right here on Point of View. But we're going to focus some time and attention right now on what is happening in the stock market, what is happening in the economy. And we bring back to the microphone Jerry Tuma, who, by the way, is a founder and president of Cornerstone Financial Services. It's a state-registered investment advisory firm right here in the Dallas area. And I might just mention, as we always do, that material on the program is not intended for specific involvement. It's really more for general information, should not be taken as specific investment, tax, or legal advice, although you certainly can contact them for that. And there is a new Cornerstone report out, and I love how it begins. Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Now, if you remember the story, one bowl of porridge was too hot, one was too cold, and one was just right. And so we have the mama bear, the daddy bear, and the baby bear. And how in the world, Jerry Tuma, does that relate to the whole issue of the stock market?
Well, Kerby, what we're trying to use as an analogy to explain to people the different types of bear markets or corrections.
Yes.
We had what I would call a mama bear last fall. Mm-hmm. So the way we're using this analogy in the newsletter, and the Goldilocks and Three Bears newsletter, is essentially this: the baby bears are sort of like the corrections that you see in the market. So not a bear market, but the context is the market's going up, like it's been going up from 2009 until 2018. All along the way, you have 5 or 10% corrections along the way. And our advice to most people is, and of course I can't give specific investment advice here, but basically what we tell people is those are the kind that usually you're better off just riding that out. Don't try to go to defense on that, because they're over quickly and you typically lose a lot of your return. Mm-hmm. Mama bears, though, and again, we've got a table in here that shows the difference in mama and daddy bears. I guess that one's on page 6, page 6. And it shows the bear markets since, essentially I took my career, how long I've been in the business since 1980. Mm-hmm. And so we contrasted the various types of bear markets. So again, we're ruling out the baby bears. Those are little corrections. But the deeper bears, the mama bears, typically, like we had one in the crash of 87. I remember doing Marlin's show years ago, right after the crash of 87. Boy, we got flooded. Hundreds of phone calls after that.
We were on the air when that was happening.
Yeah, it was crazy.
So the market
was down about 35%, but that's a mama bear. We had one in 1990 when Saddam invaded Kuwait. Big hedge fund blew up in 98, nearly threatened the whole system. That was down about 22. And the most recent one we had last year. So last year qualifies as a mama bear market. Not real huge. 20% on the major indexes like the S&P 500 or the Dow. NASDAQ was down more than that. Your darlings of the media, the Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, a lot of those are down as much as 45%, so a little more severe there. But the real issue, Kirby, and this especially applies to people that are a little bit older. As you're young, if you've got a 401k, 40 years old, I don't need my money for 25 years. There's something called dollar cost averaging that can work very well for someone like that. So if you have a bear market, even if it's one of the bad ones, a bad daddy bear like the one we had in 2008 and one in 2000, if you continue putting money in every month without fail, in this case, you tie yourself to the mast. You do not worry about how wavy the ocean is. It could be 50-foot swells. It doesn't matter. You got to tie yourself to the mast if you're going to do this. Don't stop. But when the market goes down, you're able to buy more shares at cheaper prices. And so assuming it goes back up later, even though this is no guarantee, because you can't guarantee anything, typically those people will end up with it works in their behalf because they're buying. Let's say the market goes down 50%. Well, they're buying twice as many shares at the bottom as they were at the top for the same amount of money. So that can work really well. The mama bears and daddy bears are a different story, though, especially if you're older. Now, if you're over 50, I'd say, especially if you're over 60, then our view of the world is a little different than most of the people that just say ride every storm out. Because those mama bears can be rough. We just, in my view, had one. But the real question is not, what was that one all about? Is that one going to morph into a daddy bear the second half of this year or next year?
Yes.
And that's my opinion, is probably will. So right now, market's having a great rally. We talked about in here the plunge protection team. Reagan signed an executive order right after the crash in 1987, creating the, quote, plunge protection team. That's not the technical name of it, but you get the idea. And it basically, the Secretary of the Treasury, the Federal Reserve, and the chairman of both the New York Stock Exchange and Commodities Trading Exchange all get together to discuss, we have a threat to the whole system here. And so essentially what they do is we cannot say absolutely that they go in and stuff a bunch of money in the system to boost it back up. But frankly, what they do is they stuff a whole bunch of money in the system and boost it back up. So in other words, the market's going straight down until the 24th of December last year, Christmas Eve, which is a low trading volume day. That's the day Mnuchin called a meeting. Now, before that, the Fed had a different song. They're saying, hey, we're going to continue to raise rates next year. We're going to take the quantitative tightening we talk about on page 2 in here, and we're going to keep that on autopilot. And that's when the market really had a fit. They're like, okay, the liquidity's killing us here. This market's, we had record economic numbers last year, but the market finished lower for the year.
Yeah.
We had over $1 trillion with a capital T of stock buybacks, where companies took their money they were saving with the new tax bill and bought their own company's stock back. That shrinks the amount of available stock by $1 trillion, and the market still went down. Why? Because liquidity trumps economic momentum in the long run and market momentum. So I'm not, again, going to ever be a doom and gloomer, but I think we got to have a realistic view that I think there's a really good chance that this becomes a daddy bear later this year or early next year. Don't know the timing exactly. I reserve the right to change my opinion later. And this is one of those kind of things, if I'm wrong, I'd be probably happy that I'm wrong. Right now, this bounce has got a lot of strength to it compared to what we saw in the fall. I mean, we had the worst December since, I think, 1931, and we had the best January since 1950 or something like that. So we're getting a huge bounce. The issue, Kirby, is not the economy per se. In other words, I think there's a good chance we'll have a mild economic downturn in the U.S. The rest of the world's kind of going into recession now. But those are necessary. You have to have those. Kind of like in Texas, you have to have winters to kill the bugs, or they overrun you in the summer. You have to cleanse the excesses out of the system to be healthy in the long run. But the problem is that the stock market can have a daddy bear, even if the economy is only mildly downturned, like it was in 2001. So I know we're coming up to the break. I'll need to be quiet here for a minute. But bottom line is we encourage you to get our special report, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, because I do think we could be seeing a big one coming here in the next year or so.
When we come back, let's talk about the difference between the economy and stock market. You've already alluded to that, but why are those different? And we'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Here's a question for you. What country is leading the world in reducing CO2 emissions? Germany, France? Japan? No, the country reducing greenhouse gas emissions more than any other country is the United States of America. Your ability or inability to provide the right answer to that question probably says a great deal about the news sources you consume. Much of the mainstream media made a big deal out of the fact that the U.S. withdrew from the Paris Accords, and they continuously reminded us that the U.S. never signed the Kyoto Protocol. What they rarely, if ever, told us is the U.S. has reduced CO2 emissions. Here's another question for you. What country leads the world in total CO2 emissions? If you guessed the United States, once again, you would be wrong. China is the world's largest emitter of carbon dioxide, and India is the third largest emitter. I bring this up because it shows the problem of trying to curb the United States when we don't have the ability to curb other nations. For every ton of reduced CO2 emissions in the U.S., China and India produce nearly 10 more tons. In other words, they cancel out any reduction by the United States by 10 times. The solution being proposed in the Green New Deal would be to force the United States to reduce CO2 emissions to the point that the country might be carbon neutral. That is not possible. But even if it was possible, the climate sensitivity models predict that it would only affect the world temperature by 1/10 of a degree Celsius by 2100. And even if all the countries adopted a similar policy, it would only cool the Earth by about 0.2 of a degree Celsius by the end of the century. I believe some of these important political and scientific facts deserve to be publicized while we're currently debating domestic environmental policies. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From roadside attractions, Run the Race. Two brothers share an unbreakable bond, but life's unexpected adversities put their future in question. Run the Race, rated PG, in theaters February 22nd.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, and as I mentioned, we have in studio with us today Jerry Tuma. Let me just mention, if you have some comments or questions, I certainly want to open up the phones early because we recognize so often that many of you ask questions. Oftentimes you have to ask after the program is over, and it makes it a little more difficult. Of course, you can obviously call Cornerstone Financial and cornerstonereport.com and all sorts of resources to get that information. But again, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. And Jerry, before we get into the specific, people, if they've been paying attention, say, wait a minute, last time I listened to Jerry when he was on the program here, he was saying, well, you know, we might have a downturn in the stock market, and to use your phraseology, we're going to have maybe a mama bear, but it's going to be nothing like 2008.
Right.
If I'm listening carefully here, and hopefully I am, you're suggesting that it has been a mama bear so far, but it could be a daddy bear. In other words, this one could look a little bit like 2008 because of everything else happening around the world and the issue of liquidity here in the United States. Is that a fair assessment of what you're saying?
I'd say close. How's that?
Good.
So,
well, that's why I asked the question, so you could clarify any mistake I made.
Let me clarify that a little bit. So economically speaking, I don't see anything like 2008 on the horizon at all. I think we're headed for a mild downturn. We'll probably have some sort of recession, although that's not even guaranteed. You still have to have, usually when these things happen, Kerby, it's kind of the old saying, trouble comes in threes. There's usually something else that jumps on the back of an economy that's already weakened. So right now, our economy is still strong from the tax cuts, from the deregulation, all the good stuff happening. And, you know, the Republicans passed before we lost the House. So I don't see any major downturn in the economy. But the stock market's a different story. The big difference in whether you have a mama bear or a daddy bear in the stock market is not necessarily how good or bad the economy is. So in other words, in 2000, the gross domestic product grew 4%. That was the first year of the dot-com meltdown, if you will. The next year was a very mild recession, barely qualified. You didn't even have, you're supposed to have 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth in the economy, and it wasn't even 2 consecutive. They were spaced out. So, I mean, it was almost a non-existent recession, if you will, but you had a 50% drop in the S&P 500 and an 80% drop in NASDAQ.
Wow.
So it was a very mild economic downturn, but a severe daddy bear market. So that's what I think is coming next. In other words, I don't see a big downturn in the U.S. economy at all. We've got some fiscal issues, not counting national debt. I mean, and again, I'm talking short term. I'm not talking about the long run. The long run, there's a whole different story. But the bottom line is I think we're going to probably see a mild economic downturn in the U.S., nothing big. But the thing that usually that basically tells you how bad is the bear market for stocks going to be, because they're not perfectly correlated, is not as much how much the economy goes down. It's really how over-leveraged is the stock market, how much debt is in the system, margin debt in particular, and how overvalued the stocks are. So in this one of the reasons we quantified this, Kirby, on page 7, I hate to keep referring to the pages here, but we talk about Yale, Robert Shiller, who's a Nobel Prize winner, economist from Yale, one of the best ones out there. A lot of economists, oh boy, I won't comment. There are a lot of them, they miss the mark all the time. I'll put it that way. Major downturns, they've missed them consistently for the last 100 years. He's not one of those guys. He's one that I really listen to. He adjusts what we call the price-earnings ratio, averages it over 10 years to smooth the noise out. Bottom line is you can see from that chart that we're at the second highest level of what we call market valuation. So in other words, stocks, as a percentage of their earnings, are higher than any other time except the dot-coms. So they're higher than they were in 2008. Yeah. So the issue is the severity of the bear market usually is 2 things. It's how overvalued stocks are, which in this case, we're not at Mount Everest levels of overvaluation. It's only K2, the second highest ever. Mm-hmm. And number 2, how much margin debt is in the system. Now, I don't have a chart of the margin debt in here, but the bottom line is margin debt is higher now than it was prior to either of the other 2 daddy bears, 2000 or 2007 and 8. So what I think is going to happen is similar to what we saw in 2001-ish, that time frame, is a very mild economic downturn, almost non-existent. I think some sectors won't even get hit at all. I think there be areas of the economy, they won't even feel it. It may be a speed bump in some areas, but the bottom line is we're very overvalued and we're also very highly leveraged. And so that the problem is that leverage in the system, the debt, when people borrow money in the stock market, so they put $50,000 down, borrow $50,000 from their broker, that's $100,000 they're investing. If it goes down 20%, if they just paid cash for it, they've lost $20,000 or 20% of their earnings. But if they put $50,000 down and borrow $50,000, they've lost $20,000. But that's 40% of their capital. Yeah. So they only started with 50 as original capital. So now they've lost 40. They lost 20, which is 40% of the capital. So the issue is that when you get into a scary environment, which we got kind of a foretaste of last fall, the market starts falling, then these things snowball. So in other words, you have people, it goes down. Then as the price goes down, people get what are called margin calls. Send us some more money or we're going to sell you out. Then they sell people out, and that pushes it down further.
So
and
it
then,
really is a snowball.
Yeah,
rolling down the hill.
It compounds on itself.
Yes,
because then that forces the market down more, and more people get margin calls, and then that forces it down more. And
downward spiral.
Yeah, exactly. So again, the good news is I don't see major economic problems right now. There are some issues, especially in Europe and maybe a little bit in Asia, not as bad. Longer term, if I want to make the case on the economy, I got a lot of optimism. The tax reform, assuming we can keep that. That's a game changer. That'll change things for 30 years, assuming we can keep it. We've got very positive demographics starting. I know you've written a book on demographics, as have I, the Boom to Bust and Beyond book. And the millennial generation is just now kind of entering their prime. So they're not at their peak earnings seasons yet, but they're starting that climb up. They got out of college or high school or whatever. Now they're really starting to climb in terms of their earnings and their working. And that's going to fuel the economy for a long time because consumer spending is 2/3 of economic growth. And as these guys start getting older, they're starting to form families now, as they held off for a long time. College debt, scared of the crash and all that. But now they're starting to form families. And eventually they'll start buying houses. And then they just start the cycle. They just started a little bit later than everybody. And then they got the Gen Z after them. So the demographics are very strong. I do think that sometime in the next decade, as you and I think both share this, I think we'll hit an entitlement pension crisis. That's
so,
completely different.
Yeah.
But again, so the good news, I think, from economic standpoint, I don't have a whole lot of worries. I just think that the market is at a position where history may not repeat itself exactly. You know, we didn't have what I thought we were going to have a W-shaped bottom, and I was wrong on that one. But the bottom line is that I think that we're headed probably for more of a daddy bear type bear market. So, again, how do you adapt to that? We talked about there are different strategies, different ways to handle that. A lot of that depends on your age. But, you know, there are things that you can do in markets that make money if the market morphs into a daddy bear. And again, probably if I'm on the show in the next few months, I'll be updating you whether or not I think that's happening or changing my opinion, because I don't think I'm going to change my opinion, but I always reserve the right to do that just in case, because things can change.
Well, let's take a break. And first of all, one action item is this 11-page Cornerstone report is on our website, so you can print it out. Now, I've printed it out in color, and if you have a color printer, that would be helpful because you'll be able to see some of the graphs and charts a little bit easier. But if not, just print out black and white, and that will give you some material, or you can just read it on your computer, and that will give you that information. If you'd like to join the conversation, some of you might say, okay, what are you exactly saying? I've got money in an IRA. I've got money in a 401k. What about bonds? I've been thinking about buying bonds. What about real estate? And we'll try to give general answers. We can't give specifics, but of course you could feel free to talk to Jerry off air to get a lot more specific information, but we'll try to answer those questions as generally as we can. And then my action item for you today is that next week, I believe on Monday, the Senate is going to vote on the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. It's a big, long word, a long name for what Senator Ben Sasse, who we've been talking about all week, has been talking about. And that is, he said, look, infanticide shouldn't be a partisan issue. Every single public servant should be able to say it's wrong to leave newborn babies to die. I don't care if your U.S. senators are pro-life or pro-choice. This is not difficult. Even if you are a pro-choice Democrat senator, remember the time when Bill Clinton used to say that he wanted abortion to be safe, legal, and rare. He used to oftentimes say rare with an emphasis. But given the legislation in New York, the legislation being considered in Rhode Island and Vermont, the debate that took place in Virginia, this is an issue whose time has come to say, at the very least, every member of Congress should affirm that a child outside the womb deserves the protection of law. So as you go to our website, pointofview.net, we have a button there where you can click on it or else go to the Take Action item. And there, as it loads up, it will give you a chance to put your name, address, everything. If you've done this before, then it will immediately pop up your two senators. But if not, you will fill that out. And then there is a suggested letter that you can send to them. You can make any modifications you want and then click the send button. And we believe that this is a very important vote coming up. Senator Ben Sasse has talked about it. We have talked about it. Now it's time to take some action. So go, as you do during the break here, to our website, pointofview.net. Click on that banner that says Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. We'll be back with more right after this.
Question: do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about Medi-Share.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With Medi-Share, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with Medi-Share. And they actually like Medi-Share more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of Medi-Share.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less and they like it more. No wonder Medi-Share is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join a conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Jerry Tuma with us, and as we've mentioned before, the material that we're going to present here is more in general information. If you want specific information, investment tax advice, you probably can get that from him or others. But we are, again, making available to you and have it on the website, the Cornerstone Report, Goldilocks and the Three Bears. The information, which I thought was intriguing about whether or not there really is a plunge protection team, preventing a plunge. And then just looking at this whole idea of, the baby bear. Well, those happen every once in a while. Mama bear, which we just sort of went through. And then Papa bear. And how that has been pretty awful. And if, for just a minute, we again recognize we're going to give general information, but assuming your prediction is right, and I've watched you predict so many of these with the accuracy almost of an Old Testament prophet. I think you missed 2008, as you admit.
Yes.
But everything else, you have been really spot on. It would seem to me that if I'm older, and I'm the old guy around the table, so I could relate to that, I'm going to be a lot more careful than a 20-something, a millennial listening right now, or even like Nick Pitts, who's in his 30-somethings, because he said, well, I can maybe ride this out. But you can't think about if you're going to retire or already in retirement riding that out. And so that would tell me that all things being equal, age is one of the most important factors to consider your investment strategy. True?
Absolutely, Kerby, because, again, the young people can, if they decide they want to keep putting money in, and, again, that's part of the key. Part of it is you've got a long time. So if the market crashes, you've got years and years and years to make that back. The second part of it, again, if you're putting money in every month, like in your 401k, and we give this illustration in the special report, Goldilocks and Three Bears. If you're a young person and you put money in every month, that's called dollar cost averaging. It still doesn't guarantee you'll profit. But again, if you're, if the market goes down 50%, if you're putting $100 a month in, you're buying 10 shares at the top, you're buying 20 shares at the bottom. So what that does, it averages your cost down. It pulls the cost of your investment way down. So when it goes back up the next time, then you're ahead.
Yes.
You're ahead of the game.
That makes sense if you're 20-something, but not so much if you're 60-something.
Not if you're 60 or more.
Yes.
Because then you're usually not adding a lot of money to your account anymore.
Right.
The bulk of what you've got has been saved or invested up to that point. And it's meaningful, especially if you start taking income. A lot of people take income distributions from their accounts. And if you take income out of a stock account and you have a major bear market, it's catastrophe because you hemorrhage yourself out of it. In other words, you never want to be taking money out of a stock account in a major bear market. That's disaster. And I know I've run into some clients over the years that said, "Yeah, I've retired 3 times now. Every time we had a major bear, I had to go back to work again." And so that's one of those things that you, again, age dependent. It's going to be a little bit different if you're older.
Another place where you have been so accurate is in housing. And you said something just in passing I want to come back to because back in the in the 2000s, I guess I should say, we'll go to more recent history, you predicted that the housing prices were going to go down because the median age of buying a house and looking at baby boomers and all that. So while Jerry Tuma's on this program saying housing is going to drop, you have, was it Time Magazine, I think, saying, this is a great time to buy a house.
Get rich now.
It was really a disaster. But you just said something a minute ago, because some of our callers oftentimes want to ask about, I've been thinking about buying a rental house. I've been thinking about getting a second house and then eventually selling it. You're suggesting now that we have a baby boom, then we had a baby bust or a birth dearth. Now we have a baby boomlet, which is the millennial generation.
Exactly.
And they're going to start buying houses again. So is it not possible that housing prices may eventually go up, all things being equal? Obviously, that varies from place to place and location, all that. It's going to look a little bit like it did in the late 60s, early 70s, when a lot of people said, wait a minute, these baby boomers are all going to buy a house, and the housing prices are going to do what? Boom.
Could well be, Kerby. Yeah, I think that's true, especially, and of course, all real estate is local, is the old saying.
Yes,
so
of course.
Growth areas of the country are going to do much better than areas that are not growing or stagnant. And I think, generally speaking, red states will probably do better than blue states in a lot of ways, but not always. Some of the liberals want to cohort together, and they just keep growing. And unfortunately, the left and the left coast, both lefts. But anyway, but again, demographics are huge here because the millennial generation is roughly the same size as the baby boomers. That's the kids from the baby boomer generation.
Right.
Which, of course, all of us, you're a baby boomer, so am I. We're approaching Medicare age if we're not in it already, Social Security age. So we're not going to be driving the economy here. We're not the major spenders. Major spenders happen in their 40s. And the average person peaks, or at least historically has peaked, in terms of maximizing their spending of their budget at age 44. It may be a little older than that would be my guess this time because the millennials kind of postponed started families with college debt, higher than anybody else. Again, a lot of them got skittish about things, starting a family when we had the major crash and all that stuff. But the bottom line is human behavior hasn't changed. They're still going to have families. So there's what we call family formation that's starting now, which kind of flatlined there for the last 5 or 6 years. Once Trump took off and things started getting optimistic again, now you're seeing people form families, get ready, get married, start having kids. Then they say, okay, about the first time you hear this, wah, then it's okay. Maybe we need to get a house.
Yes.
And so what's going to happen is the starter homes have been the missing component of the last housing boom. So we had the housing boom and then a massive bust. Then housing's come back real strong in most areas of the country. But again, you've got 70+ million, 76, 78 million millennials that are just now entering their house buying phase. So if you take this fast forward, I'm not talking about a year or 2 year long trend. I'm talking about a decade-long trend.
Right. We're looking longer now.
Longer term out, I think real estate's very positive looking. So you got to be careful. You don't over leverage, don't overextend yourself, don't get too hot in some of the hotter areas. But the bottom line is I think real estate, not only single-family type real estate, but I think all real estate is probably going to do real well in the next decade. Alan Greenspan's on a crusade. He's 92 years old. He was the maestro, don't you know? He's the oldest. I mean, I think he's the longest tenured Fed chairman ever.
True.
And he's going around the country telling everybody the next decade is going to be stagflation like the 1970s. He seems to be on a crusade. He's 92 years old, so what has he got to gain from this? He doesn't have a president or a Senate to have to answer to here. And I believe he's completely correct. And why? Because as you and I both know, there's a funding crisis coming for the federal government.
Right.
We've gone from $7 trillion in debt to $21 trillion since Bush left office, and it's compounding $1 trillion a year right now, and only about a third of the baby boom generation, those born between 1946 and 64, are currently covered by Medicare. These numbers just blow up in the next decade. So the good news about that, again, we got a positive trend from the millennials going in forming families, starting to buy more houses, more clothes, more cars. That helps the economy. But you've also coincidentally got to pay somehow for all the Medicare, Social Security, and all that, which is pretty well just an unfunded pension liability for the federal government. Historically, the only way to get out of those from if you study history, you can go back 5,000 years, any recorded history you can find on money. The way that politicians have always paid for that in the end was printing money.
Yeah.
And so that leads to very high rates of inflation, which is what I think the next decade is going to look like. So if you're talking about real estate, all real estate benefits from inflation some. Certain types of real estate benefit from inflation more. Like, for example, hotels can raise prices daily. We like storage because it can raise prices monthly. You don't want these 40-year-old, we did very well, by the way, for our clients, and we did very well, sorry for boasting, during the crash of 2008 because we were in things like Walgreens and Home Depots, very long-term leases, super safe, safer, paid more than their bonds did back in that day. But that's not what you want in the next decade. You don't want something that's got a 40-year lease with no rent escalator. You want, and again, if you take real estate, the pension crisis we talked about, there's a monstrous pension crisis out there, underfunded pensions
in
everywhere.
Some of those states.
$4 trillion.
Our listeners right now in Illinois and Chicago, all over that area, in California. I mean, I can give you all the examples. New York. The other day when Alexio Ocasio-Cortez said, the billions of dollars, we're not going to give it away. You don't have billions of dollars.
You're in the hole.
The state of New York is not broke. It's billions of dollars past broke.
Yeah, it's in the Grand Canyon right now.
But that's where you are with those issues. And so when we come back from the break, I want to talk about a little bit more why you say that, because I should probably do this on the front end, but we'll do it on the back end, because some people listening and saying, Well, who is Jerry Tuma, and why has he been so accurate so often?
Okay.
And that's because you've paid attention to the demographics. And also, you aren't part of a big company that says, well, I can't really tell you to sell, because if I told all of my investors to sell right now, we would create a market crash.
Yeah,
So
right.
you're in some respects, because you're looking at this biblically, because you're looking at it demographically, and because you're kind of insulated from some of the other pressures investors would give, you've been able to get much more accurate in some of those predictions. So we'll come back and talk about that. We've already patted him on the back 2 or 3 times now with certain successes that he has had, and that's why we come to him from time to time. And I might just mention that if you would like to hear more about what Jerry Tuma does, when you click on his button today, I actually have a link to his radio program, and some of you in other radio markets might want to get his Smart Money program, which is on Saturday, but you can listen to any one of these programs. And so in addition to the Cornerstone Report, we've got some links to some of the audio, and it's all available at our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. When the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit declined to review a decision of that court that said that the cross-shaped Bladensburg World War I Veterans Memorial is unconstitutional, not all the judges agreed. Chief Judge Gregory noted his dissent. He said, quote, "Nearly a century ago, Maryland citizens, out of deep respect and gratitude, took on the daunting task of erecting a monument to mirror the measure of individual devotion and sacrifice these heroes had so nobly advanced. The panel majority says their effort violates the Constitution the soldiers fought to defend. I, respectfully, think otherwise." Judge Niemeyer said with some exasperation, quote, "Until this action was filed by persons who claimed to be offended by the presence of the monument, no complaint had been made about its presence," unquote. But Judge Wilkinson was poetic in his dissent. He wrote, quote, "The dead cannot speak for themselves, but may the living hear their silence. This memorial and this cross have stood for almost 1 full century. Life and change flow by the small park in the form of impatient cars and trucks. That is disturbance enough," unquote. He concluded simply noting that the park in which the memorial stands, quote, "may not be Arlington National Cemetery, but it is the next thing to it. I would let the cross remain and let those honored rest in peace," unquote. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
For a few more minutes, Jerry Tuma in studio with us. You can join us if you'd like, but I know most of you just like to sit back, take some notes, and, of course, let me encourage you to get the 11-page Cornerstone report called Goldilocks and the Three Bears. But I thought before we go any further, let me just talk about the way in which you come about looking at this, because you have been unbelievably successful, and there are a couple of reasons. Number one, you studied with some contrarians, so they had a different kind of view of this. this. Number two, you look at this from a biblical point of view. The scriptures warn us not to presume on the future.
Right.
The scriptures, for example, tell us to divide our assets. And more importantly, you also very early on recognize what I did, and that is look at demographics. If you've got this mound, 76 million baby boomers born, first as they went through the 1950s, diaper industry revenues went through the roof.
Right.
Then all of a sudden, all of them wanted to go to college. Then all of them wanted to go into housing. And by the 1970s, housing prices went up. In each decade, you could see how this so-called pig in a python was moving through life. Now you're watching the boomlet. The millennials born between 1980 and 2000, and again, that's a larger group, interestingly enough, coming through this. And yet, these, to me, seem very obvious, but a lot of your fellow investors and investment advisors and certified financial planners, they don't seem to get any of that. I don't understand why. Maybe you can explain that.
To some degree, I think a lot of it's just how they're trained. They're trained. There's a theory called modern portfolio theory, which was invented by an atheist named Henry Markowitz. And how modern is it? It was invented in 1952. That's just how modern it is. What's changed since 52? It's still taught as religion in the school books, in the MBA programs around the country.
Yeah.
One of the precepts of it. Now you're going to laugh when I tell you this if you haven't heard it already, but it makes an assumption on the front end. One of the, because Jesus said, if you build your house on the rock, it's going to stand in the storm. If you build it on the sand, it's going to blow down, right?
Yeah.
One of the foundational principles is that investors make perfectly rational investment decisions using all available information that's in the marketplace every day.
Nope.
Not exactly.
Not exactly.
We know fear and greed dominate the markets, one to the other. So, this is goofy. And he admitted to the Miami Herald he wouldn't even eat his own cooking. He wouldn't even do his own portfolio that way because he said, I couldn't sleep at night, so I just put half in bonds and half in stocks.
Yeah.
And that's, I really believe in my own theory. And yet
he's an atheist, too. And again, if you start from a Christian point of view, there are some basic biblical principles that really need to be applied early on. And one of those is just to read the signs of the times. And one of those signs is when you see the demographics, the structure of the people going in one direction, it gives you a hint as to what's going to happen.
And the seasons change. Ecclesiastes, time to laugh, time to cry, time for war, time for peace. In my view, there's a time to buy and a time to sell. In other words, I don't do the buy and hold thing. We don't believe that people should ride bear markets out. Again, with the caveats, depending on your age and how you're going to structure it. So there are different strategies for different ages.
Sure.
But the bottom line is, I think we're entering one of those seasons. We're kind of in a fall season now. We may have a winter season. I don't think it's going to be a bad winter economically, like I said. But the keys are for the market is it's extremely overvalued and extremely margined. Those are the danger points there, and that's when you're playing with TNT or nitroglycerin, jumping around from mountaintop to mountaintop with it in your pocket. This is when you can have a big blow up. So I would encourage people to get the special report and just read it and pray about it because, again, God promises in James chapter 1, talking about a biblical principle, that if we ask wisdom, then he'll give it to us. Well, the conditions are that we believe him, that he'll give us wisdom. He doesn't upbraid us for asking, but we have to have faith that God's going to answer us in whatever form or fashion that is. You may have a peace about it. You may get a scripture. You may not get any feeling at all, but the bottom line is we're supposed to ask for God's wisdom. It's all through Proverbs. And that's what I would encourage you to do is read the special report, ask for wisdom about what to do with your personal finances.
I think there's probably some people, Jerry, that are saying, I never really paid attention to when he was on before, but I just got an inheritance from my family, or I just got a buyout that was paid to me by my company. And for the first time, I'm kind of paying attention to it. And the wrong thing to do is, well, I've got this friend, and he's a friend of a friend, and he's a certified financial planner, and I really don't know where he stands with the Lord or anything like that, but I'll have him invest it for me. I think you really need to do your own investing and do your own research, and I really trust the intelligence of our audience to say, do the research and make sure that you do things that are going to be honoring to the Lord.
Yes, and again, as you mentioned, I mentioned the modern portfolio theory. Again, that's in the CFP. I'm a certified financial planner. I had those courses. I have a master's degree from the College for Financial Planning, and I know that's in there. It's the part of the curriculum I don't agree with. Probably 80% of it I do agree with. But the bottom line is, like Jesus said, you want to build your house on the rock. So when the storm comes, it stands. And so I think you take a different approach than riding out all bear markets if you're over a certain age in particular.
So again, if people wanted to contact you, maybe they're saying, I need a little more information than just this. I've read the 11-page report. Oh, wow. Okay. Now what do I do? Maybe they're looking for a little more shoe leather, a little more specificity. Is that a possibility? They talk to you?
Our phone number is 800-327-4285. That's 800-327-4285. And we have people there that can answer your questions, any question you have.
Well, again, I just appreciate you taking the time to come in here and deal with this, because one of the other principles that I alluded to is in Ecclesiastes. It talks about really, you want to have different streams of income. The old idea that put all your eggs in one basket and watch that basket, that is maybe a wonderful little phrase, but it is not a biblical principle, is it?
No, the diversification. Ecclesiastes 11 says, divide your assets into 7, yes, 8, for you do not know what disaster might befall a land or which is going to do better this or that. So that's risk mitigation at its finest. So you want to diversify into different things, and that's what we do with portfolios. We never put more than maybe 5 to 10% in any one issue, any one particular item. But the bottom line is, in my view, I don't see the Bible encouraging buy and hold. It talks about in James 4, don't say we're going to go in such and such a city and buy or sell, say if the Lord wills. Don't presume tomorrow. And that's what I think the buy and hold strategy does. It presumes tomorrow. The old saying is the market always goes up in the long run. Well, that's been accurate. But again, what if you're in the boat that gets sunk in the next Class 5 hurricane? That's what you got to be careful about. So I would encourage people to seek some godly wisdom.
And again, as they go to your website, they'll find some of those biblical principles as well. And as you well know, I've written books on economics. This one's in Spanish, by the way, in case people wanted to read it in Spanish. And just again, one of the reasons the publisher wanted to do that is to recognize the need to get biblical principles out on some of those issues. So, Jerry, I appreciate it, and the busy life that you have, that you give us another hour here today.
You're welcome.
And let me just real quickly say that, of course, we are making available, and as far as I know, free of charge. You can print it out as much as you want. The Cornerstone Report. It's 11 pages. But if you click on the picture of Jerry Tuma, you will see that takes you to his actual radio program, which is over the weekend. It's called Smart Money. And there are all the audio pieces there so that you really can have a chance to listen to a little bit more. So if you're driving down the road and you want to listen to something, you can put it in your headphones, or if you are on a treadmill, you can learn a little bit more about economics, and Jerry can be in your ear telling you some things that you need to know so that you can apply biblical principles to your finances.
Listen to our radio show, our Saturday show on the web.
And again, I hope some of you radio stations out there might even carry it on Saturday as well. Well, just before we take a break, let me mention one more time that we want you to get involved with your 2 United States senators. It won't take you long, but we have the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. We have a link there so that you can click on it. And as we mentioned, Senator Ben Sasse introduced it, and he was really hoping that this would be accepted with unanimous consent. Well, that didn't happen. But I love his line. Infanticide should not be a partisan issue. Every single public servant should be able to say it's wrong to leave newborn babies to die. And this is why I think it's important for us to stand for life. And as you have heard us say so many times, we want to continue to do that. And this is a really simple way that you can get involved. So go to our website, pointofview.net, and click on that banner and contact your 2 United States senators. When we come back, we're going to talk about marijuana, mental illness, and violence right after this.
Here's some great news. If you missed the deadline to sign up for health insurance, or more importantly, if you sign up for a plan that you're just not happy with, you still have a choice. It's called MediShare, and MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing program. It's been around for 25 years. They have more than 400,000 members now around the country. And get this, over the years, MediShare members have shared more than $2 billion of each other's medical bills, so they could help share your needs too. And best of all, you could save a lot of money with MediShare. The typical savings for a family is around $500 a month. Your savings could be more or less, but think about what you could do with that extra money every month. So if you think you're stuck with a high-cost health plan that doesn't have much to offer, think again. You can join MediShare anytime, so call them today and check it out. There's no pressure. They're super easy to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. This hour, we're going to spend some time in just a few minutes when we're able to make contact with our next guest on the subject of marijuana, as well as mental health and violence. And it is all part of an article that we have posted where he spoke on this issue at Hillsdale College. So we have that article available to you. And of course, his book is now out called Tell Your Children the Truth About Marijuana, Mental Illness, and Violence. But let me, before we're actually able to connect up with Alex Berenson, that we also are encouraging you today to actually take some action, and that action item is to actually contact your 2 United States senators on the subject of the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. It is a piece of legislation that has been introduced in the past by Senator Ben Sasse, and of course he reintroduced it in large part because of some of the conversation that took place in the state of Virginia. You might remember the governor there, Ralph Northam, said that an infant would be delivered and resuscitated if that's what the mother and family desired, and then a discussion would ensue between the physicians and the mother. And I love what Senator Ben Sasse says. You know, the governor's frankness is rare. No euphemisms, no weasel words. And so I think it was illustrative of that. So we do have an action item for you in that regard. And I might just also mention that a little bit later we'll get into a couple of other issues. Tomorrow, of course, is our weekend edition, so we'll get into some of the political discussions and some of the questions that have surfaced out of, you know, the idea of hate crimes and the rest. But one of the reasons we wanted to focus on this issue of drugs is, first of all, if you receive some of the booklets that we make available, I'm holding in my hand here this booklet called Drug Abuse. And it came out late last year. I've, of course, from time to time spoken on this issue, and there's about a dozen pages of just some basic illustrative information. But just about a little bit later, I received this particular article from Imprimis, which comes out from our friends at Hillsdale College, in which it was a message actually by Alex Berenson on marijuana, mental illness, and violence. And so that certainly got me interested in this issue. Of course, now his book is out called Tell Your Children the Truth About Marijuana, Mental Illness, and Violence. And he joins us now by phone. So, Alex, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Oh, thanks so much for having me on.
I might just mention you have, of course, been with the New York Times since 1999. You've covered things like drug industry, Hurricane Katrina. You spent some stints in Iraq, and I appreciate your service there as a correspondent. Many people might know you from the 11 John Wells novels, but I thought we would spend some time today talking about this issue of marijuana. And I did a commentary on you recently, but I said that a lot of this happened simply because you were talking to your wife, who at that time had worked in a place where there were a number of individuals who were dealing with various psychotic disorders. And in the course of the conversation, your wife, Jackie, said something about, well, of course, he's been smoking pot his whole life. And you said, of course. And she said, well, yes, they all smoke marijuana. And rather than make fun of you, she just said, well, why don't you study it? And you began to study this whole link between psychotic disorders like schizophrenia and marijuana. And I believe that's at least one reason why you ended up writing this whole book. Tell us more.
So that's true. My wife is a forensic psychiatrist, which means that she deals with the criminally mentally ill, and until pretty recently, she was director of forensics at a big hospital in New York State that has several hundred. They're called patients, although they're really prisoners.
Yes.
And so she's very knowledgeable about this issue, and she trained at Harvard and Columbia, and is a real expert. So really, I should have listened to her when she told me that that cannabis is linked to psychosis. But of course, like a lot of people, like a lot of Americans, I had spent the last 30 years listening to people tell me that any link there was propaganda, and that Reefer Madness, which is a famous movie from the 30s that sort of is mocked by people in the cannabis advocacy community, and so I didn't really believe her, to be honest with you. I'm a political independent, and I don't really lean left or right that much, but so I was skeptical of this link, to be honest with you. But I'm also an investigative reporter by training, and there's a famous line among investigative reporters that if your mother says she loves you, check it out. You can never take anything on faith.
Yeah, we say that so often around here, so I agree with you. And let me just say that from my background, I was born in Berkeley, so you can imagine what I went up through in the 1960s. And of course, we'll get into this in just a little bit, that the amount of THC is much more than it was. But I've said on the air something similar to what you've said, and that is the gap between insider and outsider knowledge is huge. And the way I've put it is, at a time when more and more states want to legalize, decriminalize medical marijuana or recreational marijuana, is a time when we're finding out more and more about some of the really significant health concerns about marijuana. So however you say it, that's, I think, one of the reasons that it's been sort of a wake-up call for quite a number of us.
That's absolutely correct. And so I basically, this was not that complicated and a reporting project for me on some level, because there has been so much work done on this. There's been so much science. There's been so many peer-reviewed studies. There's been so many reports of people getting psychotic after being in laboratories and being given THC. There's a tremendous amount of science showing that cannabis can cause psychosis. And psychosis is the term that psychiatrists use when somebody has a break from reality, where they might be hearing voices, or they might be, having hallucinations or delusions. All kinds of potential breaks, essentially, from reality. And then schizophrenia is the term that psychiatrists use really when that break becomes permanent. And so there's a tremendous amount of evidence that cannabis is linked both to temporary psychosis and to schizophrenia. And so on some level, the book is, it's about that. It's about the science. It's about how we determine this. But secondarily, almost as important in the book is this idea of how come people don't know this? If scientists know this, if psychiatrists know this, if people in emergency rooms know this, and if the families of people who've been affected by this know this, how come the rest of us don't know this? And that is a story. It's sort of a story of both the cannabis industry, which is comprised both of for-profit companies and of nonprofits that want to push for legalization. But it's also a real failure of journalism. It's a failure of the New York Times, where I used to work, and it's a failure of the Washington Post and other elite media institutions not to treat the claims about cannabis with the skepticism that they treat other claims about drugs. And so, honestly, I should not have been able to write this book. This book should not be a surprise to people. If people who are adequately informed about the science, they would know all this already. And I think the reason the book has come as such a shock, and why it's angered the drug policy community so much, is that these people have been able to spread myths for 20 years, and nobody's pushed back on them. And guess what? That is over. That day is over. And it's not just me. The scientists are speaking out. Other people are speaking out.
We're going to take a break, continue our conversation for a few more minutes with Alex Berenson. And again, the book is entitled Tell Your Children the Truth About Marijuana, Mental Illness, and Violence. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Here's a question for you. What country is leading the world in reducing CO2 emissions? Germany? France? Japan? No, the country reducing greenhouse gas emissions more than any other country is the United States of America. Your ability or inability to provide the right answer to that question probably says a great deal about the news sources you consume. Much of the mainstream media made a big deal out of the fact that the U.S. withdrew from the Paris Accords. And they continuously reminded us that the U.S. never signed the Kyoto Protocol. What they rarely, if ever, told us is the U.S. has reduced CO2 emissions. Here's another question for you. What country leads the world in total CO2 emissions? If you guessed the United States, once again, you would be wrong. China is the world's largest emitter of carbon dioxide, and India is the third largest emitter. I bring this up because it shows the problem of trying to curb the United States when we don't have the ability to curb other nations. For every ton of reduced CO2 emissions in the U.S., China and India produce nearly 10 more tons. In other words, they cancel out any reduction by the United States by 10 times. The solution being proposed in the Green New Deal would be to force the United States to reduce CO2 emissions to the point that the country might be carbon neutral. That is not possible, but even if it was possible, the climate sensitivity models predict that it would only affect the world temperature by 1/10 of a degree Celsius by 2100, and even if all the countries adopted a similar policy, it would only cool the Earth by about 2/10 of a degree Celsius by the end of the century. I believe some of these important political and scientific facts deserve to be publicized while we're currently debating domestic environmental policies. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From roadside attractions, Run the Race. Two brothers share an unbreakable bond, but life's unexpected adversities put their future in question. Run the Race, rated PG, in theaters February 22nd.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Alex Berenson on with us for a few more minutes as we talk about marijuana, mental illness, and violence. And again, the new book out, Tell Your Children. It is available. We have a link on our website. You can follow that as well. And Alex, one of the things you talked about are some of the myths. And when I watch television, Ken, I've studied this a little bit, not even as much as you have, but, you hear about, well, marijuana has lots of different uses. Actually, not necessarily the case. It's a great way to relieve pain. And as you point out, a very large 4-year study actually suggested in that particular case it was associated with greater pain. So you can go through these myths, and I hear those repeated so often when I turn on my local television program, or I hear testimony before a legislature, or I read various articles. But one of the things that we have talked about on this program is the National Academy of Medicine has said that cannabis use is likely to increase the risk of developing schizophrenia and other psychoses, and even the higher the use, the greater the risk. And at a time when we have more legalization of marijuana, both recreational marijuana and medical marijuana, it is true that maybe casual use hasn't increased, but heavy use has increased rather dramatically, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. I think it's important to be clear on a couple of things. There's no difference between recreational and medical marijuana. It's the same plant. It's got the same THC in it. THC is the chemical in marijuana that gets you high. It's the reason people smoke. One of the advocacy community has spread so many myths, and they've been so aggressive about spreading it. I could practically spend hours trying to distill them down for you. But here's another super important thing to understand, which is CBD, okay, and your listeners may have heard of CBD, and they may see it in stores. And they may say, oh, CBD, that's marijuana. That's, I see it in stores. It doesn't get me high. I can buy it, for my arthritis or whatever. CBD is the non-intoxicating compound in marijuana. Marijuana has a whole bunch of chemicals in it, and different strains have different sort of levels of those chemicals. But the stuff that people are using to get high, that users are using to get high, is THC. Okay, the stuff that is an intoxicant. It has severe psychiatric side effects. It is a dangerous recreational drug. Now, and if you're going to use it knowing that that's what it is. Okay, and that's fine. For some people, it's that some adults want to say, you know what, I'm a grown up. I don't really care what the laws are around this, whether it's legal in my state or not. I like this. I'm going to use it. Okay, that's a personal choice. But let's not get confused about what marijuana and THC are. Now, CBD is totally different. CBD doesn't get you high, and there is actually good evidence that CBD can actually help children with seizures,
right,
which is something you hear a lot.
Yes.
But that's not what people are using marijuana for. And and honestly, CBD is marketed for a lot of stuff that it probably isn't very much used for. But you know what? So be it. Like that's true of a lot of, herbal remedies and stuff. What I'm talking about and what your listeners really need to understand is THC is not CBD, and medical marijuana isn't a real thing. Medical marijuana is just a way for people to get high, to get what's called an authorization card from a physician, not a prescription, because you can't get a prescription for marijuana because it's not an FDA-approved drug, and that way they don't get arrested by the police when they're using. And almost everybody in states where medical marijuana is legal who gets a card was previously a recreational user. The worst thing of the many bad things that the cannabis legalization lobby has done in the last 20 years is encourage this confusion. It has encouraged people who are at risk for psychiatric diseases to think of marijuana as medicine, and that is incredibly dangerous for them. Let's be clear about what marijuana is.
And again, you mentioned THC. I said this in passing, but it's worth emphasizing again. Back in the 1960s when I was growing up, and even in the early 1970s, people that used cannabis back then, maybe there was, about 2% of THC. Now it's 10 times or more, anywhere from 20 to 25% because of genetics and various kinds of things. So this is a much more potent kind of marijuana than it was back in the 60s and 70s, isn't it?
That's absolutely correct. And what your listeners may not know, what most people who don't use marijuana, and most Americans don't use marijuana, don't know is that heavy users don't even stop with this high potency plant anymore. They like to smoke synthetic THC or eat THC in a pure form. And the way you get that is you extract THC from the plant. You use either butane or carbon dioxide to get this chemical, this compound out of the plant, and then you either ingest it or you smoke it. Now, does that sound like a plant that, that's green and leafy? No, it isn't. It's a semi-synthetic compound. And so, I think the cannabis advocacy community has promoted myths. Now, I don't know if you've used cannabis growing up ever. I don't know if, some of your listeners might have a few times when it was much lower potency. But those people don't have any idea what the drug people are using today is like.
Yes. Just before we go, though, I wanted to get your other link, and that is to violence. Now, the first thing I'll mention is, of course, not all schizophrenics, a majority of them are not violent. But when you go back and look at emergency rooms, you look at various studies like the Frontiers of Forensic Psychiatry, you look at the Journal of Interpersonal Violence, you have lots of examples of a very significant connection between heavy use of cannabis and schizophrenia, don't you?
Well, yes, between schizophrenia and then schizophrenia is a link to violence, and so there's quite a bit of evidence. We know alcohol can cause violence, and alcohol can be dangerous for people when they use too much of it. There's quite a bit of evidence that cannabis, what epidemiologists call the rate ratio, the likelihood that you're going to become violent if you use cannabis, is similar to, if not higher, for cannabis than for alcohol. But I do want to say something about the book, which is, so the book is called Tell Your Children. And look, what's interesting to me actually is the book has had an impact seemingly on the public policy debate around cannabis already. That's not really the reason I wrote the book. I wrote the book so that people who have kids, who might be in their teens or, even young adults in their 20s, who are using this stuff and they don't really understand what's happening to their kids, this book will give them a resource and help put that in context for them. And even if you're using this drug and you say to yourself, you know what, everything I see tells me, oh, this isn't supposed to be addictive and it's not supposed to be that dangerous for me, yet I'm having problems with it. This book hopefully will give you some resources to help understand what's happening to you. And even if we get to full legalization, which unfortunately I think may happen, certainly if a Democrat is elected in 2020, that's likely. Even if we get there, this problem is not going to go away. And I hope the book will give people some resources.
Let me also mention that in our little booklet on drug abuse, we have a section from one of the interviews I've done in the past in which those individuals that were on the program pointed out that they found that only about 5% of parents believed that their kids had used inhalants when it was really 20%. Only 21% of the parents believed their friends or even their kids or their friends had ever used marijuana when it was 51%. So another warning from your book is you need to tell your kids and you need to be a lot more proactive because unfortunately, a lot of parents tend to think, oh, my kids are not using marijuana, and really they are. That's really one of the reasons why you wanted to warn them about this.
You're absolutely correct. And another problem that's come up in just the last year or two is what's called juuling, which is vaping, inhaling pure nicotine. And that is something that kids can do on the fly. And once they start doing that, it's very easy to convert a juul so that you can inhale THC, which is a very dangerous thing to do. And I can't tell you since the book came out, the number of parents I've heard from who say, my kids, my 15-year-old, and he goes to a Christian school or he goes to a fancy suburban high school, whatever, that all these kids are doing this, and my kid is one, and I didn't even realize it until I saw the behavioral changes in him. You're absolutely right. This is something that parents do need to look out for.
Again, we have a link to the book. It has come out through Free Press, about 270 pages. Should be able to find it in your local bookstore, but we have a link so that you can get it either in hardback or on Kindle. And again, it's entitled Tell Your Children the Truth About Marijuana, Mental Illness, and Violence. And if you'd like to read the short piece that was in the Hillsdale College Imprimis, that's on the website as well. So, Alex, appreciate you giving us some time today, and thank you so very much for doing the research and writing the book.
Kirby, thanks so much for having me and for spreading the word.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I'll take some phone calls. We'll get back into a little bit more of this issue of marijuana and drug use. And if you don't have our little booklet on drug abuse, it's about a dozen pages, and it's something we've been making available to some of our donors. But if you're not a donor and like to get a copy, I'm sure we could give you a copy of that. And also just have a few more things to talk about. I think we know a little bit more about hate crimes, and we've learned quite a bit this week, haven't we? So we'll get into some of those issues. So all sorts of very important topics in this last half hour, but I want to make it an open line. If you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. Again, we have an action item for you to jump into, the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. If nothing else, can't we at least agree on something? Can't we at least agree that infanticide is wrong? And legislation to require doctors to provide the same level of care for a child that is born from a botched abortion should be required. So if you agree with that, I hope you'll contact your senators. We'll be right back.
Question: do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about Medi-Share.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With Medi-Share, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with Medi-Share. And they actually like Medi-Share more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of Medi-Share.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less, and they like it more. No wonder Medi-Share is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let me just mention some of the resources we have on our website today. We make these available so that if you are engaged in a conversation with someone, for example, maybe you're talking about finances and they say, where did you hear that? Or why should I believe what you're saying about the possibility that we might have an economic downturn or there are some problems with the stock market or whatever? Well, we have the Cornerstone Report posted. Just a few minutes ago, we had a chance to talk with Alex Berenson. And again, here's an individual that actually has been writing about this issue and the possible link between marijuana, mental illness, and violence. And they might say, well, wait a minute, how do I know that's true? Of course, we have a link to the book, but we also have this very good article that's kind of a summary by Alex that appeared in the Hillsdale College Imprimis. By the way, I love Hillsdale College and appreciate the fact that they make that available to so many people. And you have all sorts of people making statements that just simply aren't true. And I love his line in which he said, never, at least he has never seen, a story where the gap between insider and outsider knowledge was so great or the stakes were so high. Now, I might say that it's unintended, but my commentary today is about CO2 emissions and the Green New Deal. And again, never has there been such a gap between what we know to be true scientifically and what the average person that is hearing about climate change actually knows. And so that viewpoint's commentary is pretty good as well. But again, he's been very concerned, as I have, that at a time when more states are legalizing marijuana use, whether it's medical marijuana, recreational marijuana, and he makes no distinction. I'm trying to at least be fair about that. But at a time when we're legalizing marijuana use, whatever it might be, medical professionals are finding more and more danger. And he talks about some of those myths, and I just mentioned those in passing. But let me mention for a minute before we move on to our next topic, because obviously we need to talk a little bit about Jussie Smollett. But, the medical literature really challenges a lot of that. For example, we hear, and you turn on television, I heard this the other day, marijuana has many different medical uses. Well, his book and all sorts of medical literature says, actually, it's been only shown to work in a few very narrow conditions. We're told that it's very effective for pain relief. How many times have we heard that? And actually, there are studies that either don't verify that, or one that he mentions, and again, you can find this on our website in his article there, a very large 4-year study of patients with chronic pain that showed that cannabis use was associated with greater pain over time. And so this is the big concern that I've mentioned, and I only mention it in passing in this book on drug abuse. Maybe eventually I'll do just one on marijuana if need be. But the National Academy of Medicine, these are not necessarily people prone to make strong statements. If there's one thing you learn about some of these academies, you have to get a lot of consensus before they'll make any kind of definitive statement. And so here is what the National Academy of Medicine says, quote, cannabis use is likely to increase the risk of developing schizophrenia and other psychoses. Then they go on to say the higher the use, the greater the risk. And of course, he then takes it to the issue of violence. I mentioned some of these articles, which point out again, a majority, I would say, of schizophrenics are not violent. But that only means more than half. If you have worked in an emergency room, if you have worked in some of these psych wards, as his wife has, you recognize that there is quite a bit of evidence now in the medical literature that a percentage of those individuals are violent, and this schizophrenia that is induced by medical marijuana or recreational marijuana has done a great deal of harm. So if you find yourself saying, I'd like to read a little bit more about that, go to the website, pointofview.net. I had somebody call in recently off air that said, okay, when I go to your website, I see the pictures of the people you've interviewed. I see the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, but how do I find the articles? Well, there's a button there that says See More. So just click on the button that says See More. Then you can scroll down. You can see my picture. You can see the pictures of all the individuals we've interviewed, and then you go all the way down, and then you will see even the book, Tell Your Children, and then you'll see that the first article there is called Marijuana, Mental Illness, and Violence, and then that is the one that was produced through Imprimis, and that will be the piece that you can then get printed. And the other article there is by our friend Ben Shapiro, who entitled this 3 Lessons from the Jussie Smollett Hoax. But let's, if we can, for just a minute, kind of give you an update. As you will have heard us argue, this looked almost like a fraud from the beginning, and there were all sorts of questions that needed to be asked about what happened on that night on January 29th. Well, we've learned a little bit more. Matt Vesta talks about this in a piece, but let's just simply go to the Chicago Police Department. I think we deserve a round of applause and accolades to the superintendent of the Chicago Police Department, because today he spent a fair amount of time criticizing the actor Jussie Smollett and added a few more pieces to the conversation. First of all, the first one had to do with this letter. Most of us had not heard much about the letter, but he sent himself a letter using all sorts of racist language. When that didn't work, then he paid $3,500 to orchestrate this attack. Again, some of these people aren't the smartest knife in the drawer, because the attack was supposed to take place in front of one of these video cameras. Unfortunately for him, fortunately for us, the video camera was pointed in the opposite direction. I think he was hoping that there would be a great piece of video that would get played again and again and again, and that then would make him kind of like Rodney King Part 2, that this would maybe even stimulate a race riot. I wondered why he did that, but it turns out, at least according to the Chicago Police Department, is because he was unhappy with his salary on the show Empire. And so this thing was all constructed then. And I've got to give credit to the superintendent, if for no other reason than the fact that he was willing to call him out, not say, well, maybe he was undergoing some difficulties or some stress, and maybe he was a victim. They treated him as a victim, I think they said like 47 of the first 48 hours. And finally, story broke, and they realized he was the perpetrator, not the victim. And so we've learned some of those lessons about that. But just before we take a break, let me real quickly go to a piece that I thought would be really helpful, and that is the piece by Ben Shapiro, because he had 3 lessons from the Jussie Smollett hoax. He says, first of all, the alleged victims sometimes have an incentive to lie. He says for several years, each time an alleged victim tells an unverified and unverifiable story, we're told that we must believe the victim's story. Why? Well, why would a victim lie is the argument always made, but he said this is often untrue. Smollett had an incentive to lie, unending media attention, finding sympathy with the politicians, and the potential for even greater Hollywood stardom. If Smollett had gotten away with his hoax, he'd be the face of gay black suffering in the United States. Few heard of him before the story, suddenly found himself on Good Morning America telling the world about his own bravery. That's pretty lucrative. So, first of all, sometimes they do have an incentive to lie. Number 2, again, this is the Ben Shapiro article, hoaxers can read the tea leaves. Ben Shapiro puts it this way: there's a reason that the most prominent racial and sexual hoaxes have generally flattered the political sensibilities of the political left. Right-wing hoaxes might catch the attention of right-wing sources, but left-wing sources are far more powerful and plentiful. He says, imagine if a Make America Great hatted young Republican was accused or had accused 2 young black men of assaulting him and shouting nasty words about Donald Trump. That story might get play on talk radio, Fox News, but it wouldn't earn an iota of attention, he says, from a celebrity culture or the mainstream media. And then the third point he makes is social media makes hoaxes infinitely easier. There are large-scale incentives for jumping on every story before the facts are clear. which is why both Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey and Senator Kamala Harris from California, both running for president, tweeted their support for him and then had to essentially backtrack radically, although some of them hadn't said a whole lot about it, but that's my comment, suggesting that the hoax emerged, that they had to wait for more facts, being the first to rip America and actually show that this is the type of country we live in. He goes on with some other points, but I think you can get the idea. And when we come back, I'll have a couple other real quick comments about that. But if you'd like to join our conversation, I suspect on our weekend edition tomorrow, we'll maybe get into a little bit more of that. But I did want to cover that story because it is front page. And kudos to the superintendent of the Chicago Police Force for being willing to speak plainly and to call out something that cost a lot of time and attention and money and could have led to a race riot. Fortunately, it did not. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. When the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit declined to review a decision of that court that said that the cross-shaped Bladensburg World War I Veterans Memorial is unconstitutional, not all the judges agreed. Chief Judge Gregory noted his dissent. He said, quote, "Nearly a century ago, Maryland citizens, out of deep respect and gratitude, took on the daunting task of erecting a monument to mirror the measure of individual devotion and sacrifice these heroes had so nobly advanced. The panel majority says their effort violates the Constitution the soldiers fought to defend. I, respectfully, think otherwise." Judge Niemeyer said with some exasperation, quote, "Until this action was filed by persons who claimed to be offended by the presence of the monument, no complaint had been made about its presence," unquote. But Judge Wilkinson was poetic in his dissent. He wrote, quote, "The dead cannot speak for themselves, but may the living hear their silence. This memorial and this cross have stood for almost one full century. Life and change flow by the small park in the form of impatient cars and trucks. That is disturbance enough," unquote. He concluded simply noting that the park in which the memorial stands, quote, "may not be Arlington National Cemetery, but it is the next thing to it. I would let the cross remain and let those honored rest in peace," unquote. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If nothing else, you got to admit that when you listen to Point of View, we talk about a lot of different topics, haven't we, today? We've talked about financial issues, and that has taken us from the Federal Reserve to the stock market to housing and all of that. We've spent some time talking about marijuana and mental health and violence. We certainly have talked about hate crimes and the need for us to have some kind of discernment. And that really is my commentary coming out on Monday, because what we're recognizing is you're going to have to exercise discernment, because there's too much pressure on the mainstream media, too much pressure on social media to try to get your attention. So even unverified stories get a more attention than they deserve. How many times have I heard, especially when people have, not liking Donald Trump, taken some outrageous statement that has been made about the president, and then they come on the air and say, now, if true, this could be really damaging for the Trump administration. Well, the if true is the key part, because almost all of those allegations, all of the statements that have been made about the Mueller report, which finally is coming out next week, most all of them have turned out to be wrong. But they say that anyway, and here the same thing. There were all sorts of reasons why you should have been a little bit skeptical about Jussie Smollett. And I, even when I first heard the report, said to somebody near me, I in some respects, I hope it's true, because if it's not, I mean, this guy has really gone beyond the pale, because it just didn't sound right from the beginning. But again, sometimes it's worth holding your evaluation. We certainly want to give people their due, but it's becoming more and more obvious that the press and even political candidates, it's just too juicy. They'll just jump on a story. So that's why you need to exercise discernment. And some of you might say, well, why were you so skeptical? Well, two reasons. Number one, as we've talked about on this program this week, I have article after article, commentary after commentary on fake hate crimes. There's actually a website, I don't know if you know this, called Fake Hate Crimes. As well as, and I'll give a few examples in just a minute if you'd like to know them, but that was the first point. Point number two is it just didn't ring true. You know, how is an African-American, a black man, in a fairly liberal city of Chicago, because I've spent time in Chicago with Moody Broadcasting and everything, be attacked in the middle of the night because of his race or his sexual orientation? How would his attackers even know who he is? I mean, if he had said that he was followed from his apartment and they had attacked him before, or said some things to him, maybe that made sense. But here, the temperature at that time, I think they figured out, was -9 degrees. So he had to be completely bundled up. And so how would they have even known who he was? Then the piece about the bleach and the rope, and wearing MAGA hats, Make America Great hats. Yeah, they're wearing those. I mean, there are just so many things that did not actually ring true. But again, you can look through the transcripts, and I encourage you to do so, and read the stories, the newspapers, internet sites. You don't see even the slightest bit of hesitation or disclaimer. And earlier in the week, I even talked about how some had said, if the New York Times had said Jussie Smollett said he was attacked, but instead they just say he was attacked. I mean, there was never any attempt to try to even suggest that maybe there were a few facts that didn't match up. And the people on the internet that started to raise questions, boy, they got pilloried in ways you would never have imagined before. And as I've pointed out, we've got all sorts of examples. You want to use an example of a fake hate crime for a homosexual? Well, how about the homophobic message on a cake that was in Whole Foods in Austin, Texas? That one just didn't pass the straight face test. If you don't know anything about Austin, Texas, it's a pretty liberal place. Whole Foods, probably an individual there probably going to be pretty sympathetic to the LGBT community. And turns out that it was actually done by a customer with the LGBT community. All sorts of fake hate crimes dealing with African Americans. The example I used the other day, these 3 black co-eds at the University of Albany attacked on a city bus. That one, by the way, led to a huge rally at the University of Albany in New York, protesting racism. But the thing they forgot is their surveillance cameras, and all they did was show on the surveillance that these 3 black women were beating up on a 19-year-old white woman on the bus. And Islam, well, we've got lots of those examples. Lots of Muslim women have falsely claimed that somebody pulled their head coverings off. Example I used in a commentary coming out on Monday is a student at Beloit, Muslim student, had anti-Muslim graffiti on his door. The police investigated, found that he perpetuated the fraud himself. So the point I'm making is, are there hate crimes? Of course there are. Matter of fact, there is one category where hate crimes seem to be increasing dramatically, and I want to talk about that tomorrow with our roundtable guest. The category of attacks on Jewish people, anti-Semitic attacks, at Jewish centers, at synagogues, and of Jewish people. Anti-Semitism maybe does seem to be on the rise, and we'll get into that maybe more tomorrow. But while we're talking about commentaries, my commentary on Monday, of course, is media and hate crimes, and then throughout the week we get into some of these other topics we're addressing. But my commentary today is on reducing CO2 emissions. And if you haven't had a chance to download this, again, I'm trying to just say there is a real gap between what we know scientifically and what the general public knows about the issue of climate change. And I start with a simple question. What country is leading the world in reducing CO2 emissions? You can go out and ask your friends. They'll say, Germany, France, Japan. No, the answer is United States. The United States has reduced greenhouse gas emissions more than any other country. And this is a country, by the way, where we were reminded time and time again by the press that we withdrew from the Paris Accords. We never actually ratified the Kyoto Protocol, all sorts of things, while these other countries are actually ones that signed these accords and protocols. They haven't done as well. And then I ask, of course, another real obvious question, and that is, which country leads the world in producing CO2 emissions? And everybody would say United States. Nope, it's China. Matter of fact, number 3 is India. And unless we can even think about getting China and India together, the possibilities aren't very good. But more importantly, then if you start looking at the various climate models and what are called climate sensitivity models, even if we were to get everybody to really sign on to what the United States has been able to do without even signing those treaties, we still would only be able to affect the world temperature by 1/10 of a degree Celsius. If you get all the countries of the world, maybe 2/10 of a degree Celsius, which just illustrates again something that, again, you can look at scientifically, and that is CO2 is not the problem. It's not the cause. In some respects, it's the effect. And there's a logarithmic graph, I won't get into all the science, that suggests that reductions at that level will make no difference whatsoever. So the point is, a lot of people are convinced that the world is going to end in 12 years, which is not. And they're convinced that there are just a few things, but maybe a little difficult things that we need to do to prevent the destruction of the world in 12 years. And that's not true either. And so those are just a couple of facts that really need to be put on the table so that we have an intelligent discussion about policy issues in the future. But we are out of time, so let me just real quickly mention that if you'd like to get my viewpoints commentary today on reducing CO2 emissions, you can go to the website pointofview.net. You might want to sign up to receive my commentaries come to your inbox Monday through Friday. Penna Dexter's will come to you on Saturday, and we'll talk about hers tomorrow. If you haven't signed up to contact your 2 United States senators on the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, that is available as well. If you'd like to get that Cornerstone report, make sure you have at least 11 pieces of paper in your printer, because it's 11 pages long, and I think you'll learn some material about that. And if you know some young people that are saying, marijuana, no problem. Oh, there is a problem, and you might want to print out that piece that we have posted from Imprimis and Hillsdale College. So all of it is available at the website. We've covered a lot of issues today. I know we're going to cover a lot more tomorrow on our Friday weekend edition. I want to thank Andrew and Steve. We'll see you back here tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Roadside Attractions presents Run the Race. 2 brothers share an unbreakable bond, but life's unexpected adversities put their future in question.
It's all part of his plan, right? God does love you. He loves you like crazy.
From executive producers Tim Tebow and Robbie Tebow, Run the Race. Rated PG, parental guidance suggested. In theaters February 22nd. More information is available at runtheracemovie.com.
Jesus said you could find a person's heart by where they invest their money. We at Point of View could not be more thankful that so many demonstrate a love for truth and for this nation by investing in our common mission. Of course, the reality is our team, our truth team, is a small percentage of those who listen. And right now, as they say in sports, we could use a deeper bench. For those who have given, thank you. And if you haven't made that step yet, take one now. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Show your heart for our future. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely